All right, today we're talking about greatest common factors. We're still factoring, but now we're factoring trinomials. Trinomial means we have three terms. All right, so to refresh our memory, how to find the greatest common factor. All right, we want to take out the greatest number that goes into 10 and 40. Okay, what's the biggest number that goes into 10 and 40? It's going to be a 10. 1 times 10, 2 times 5. 40 is 1 times 40, 2 times 20, 4 times 10, 5 times 8. So the biggest number that both of these guys have in common is not the 5, but the 10. Okay, 10 is the greatest common factor there. Now, if you're looking at your a's as well, we've got a squared and we've got a. How many a's do they have in common? They both have at least 1. So my GCF there is 10a. Now, if I'm going to factor this, and I take out a 10a, you still need a parenthesis to tell me what's left over. So 10 divided by 10 leaves me with a 1 left over. And if I had two a's and I took one of them out, there's still 1 left over. So if you want to put 1a right here, you can. It's not necessary to put the coefficient of 1 in front of the a. And then we have a plus. So now what's left over in the second term? We had a 40. We divided it by 10. So that's 4 is left over. We had 1a. We took that 1a out, so there aren't any a's left over. So the GCF there is 10a. So to factor it, you get 10a times a plus 4. All right, so that's finding our GCF. Now, trinomials. Okay, trinomials means we have three terms. All right, today, all the trinomials we're looking at have a values of 1, meaning my leading coefficient right here is a 1. I love it when the leading coefficient is a 1. It makes it very, very easy. What we're doing here is we need to find two numbers. Let's go ahead and write our 2 parentheses. Anytime my a value here is a 1, I can go straight to my final answer of 2 parentheses. Now, at the beginning of the trinomial, I have x squared. So I always ask myself, what multiplies by itself to give me x squared? Well, x times x is what's going to give me x squared. So I need to have an x at the beginning of each parenthesis there. Now, I need another number at the end here, and I need a number at the end here. Well, how do I figure out what numbers those are going to be? Well, I need two numbers that multiply to give me the last number. In this case, it's an 8. Okay, so my product here is going to be 8. What multiplies to give me 8? And it also has to add to give me the middle number. So that's what the sum means. It has to add up to the middle number of -9. So I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to 8, and they add up to -9. So my options for 8 are going to be 1 times 8, 2 times 4, and that's it. Well, if I add 1 and 8, that adds up to 9. And if I add 2 and 4, that adds up to 6. I need it to add up to a -9. So 1 and 8 sounds most like it, that's what it needs to be, but 1 and 8 add up to 9. So if I need it to add up to a -9, then I need to change my signs. So it's actually going to be -1 and -8, because if I multiply -1 times -8, negative times negative still multiplies to +8. That's what I need, multiplies to +8. But when I add -1 plus -8, now it adds up to -9. So the two numbers I'm using here are -1 and -8. And it doesn't matter what order you put it in. I could have put x minus 8 here and x minus 1 there. That would have been just fine. Okay, so if this would have said +9 in the middle, then I would need numbers that multiply to 8 and add up to 9. In that case, +1 and +8 would have added to a +9, and it would have been +1 and +8. So that is factored. We are finished there. All right, so let's look at number 10. All right, I'm looking for two numbers that multiply the product. They have to multiply to my last number here of -35. And the two numbers that I'm looking for also need to add up to the middle number of -2. So I come off to the side and I look for the multiples of -35. 1 times -35. 2, 3, 4, 5 times -7. 7 times -5. And I think it's just going to be 35 times negative 1. So, again, when my leading coefficient is a 1, I love that. I can go straight to my final answer. So what in the front multiplies to give me x squared? Well, x times x gives me x squared. So now, which of these combinations of numbers are going to add up to negative 2? Well, negative 35 plus 1, that's negative 34. Not even close. 35 minus 1, that's positive 34. Not even close. 5 minus 7 and 7 minus 5. 5 minus 7 gives me negative 2. 7 minus 5 gives me positive 2. I need it to add up to a negative 2. So which ones am I using? Not the one that gives me a positive 2. I'm using this one, since that's what gives me a negative 2. So I'm using a positive 5 and a negative 7. And again, I could have flip-flopped these. I could have put my negative 7 in the front and my positive 5 at the back. Either way you write it is okay, as long as you've got the right signs with the right numbers. Okay, so down here at the bottom, little hint. Okay, I've got a little hint. If your equation is set up like this, if you have pluses, if you have two pluses, you always look at the last sign first. When the last sign is a plus sign, then that means your two signs in your parentheses are going to be the same. Okay, they're going to be the same. Well, then you look at the first sign to see what they're both going to be. This says they're going to be the same signs, and if we look at the front one, that tells me, boom, they're both going to be positives. Here, this tells me they're going to be the same sign. So then when you look at the first one, boom, that tells me they're both going to be negatives. And that's what happened in problem number 5. We had a plus at the end, which tells me the signs are going to be the same. So then if we look here, that tells me they're both going to be negatives. So both signs I used here were negatives. Okay, so I knew 8 and 1 was multiplied to 8, and 8 and 1 adds to 9, so they're both negatives. Okay, now, if your last sign is a negative sign, okay, if it's a subtraction back here, okay, that tells you that your signs are going to be different. Okay, one's going to be positive, one's going to be negative. So you could have a plus in the front and then a negative in the back, or you could have a negative in the front and a negative in the back. But if you see a negative in the back, right off the bat, you know the signs are going to be different. One's going to be a positive, one's going to be a negative. Same with number 10. We had a negative right here in the back, so right away I know I'm going to have one positive number and one negative number. All right, so if we flip it over to the back, okay, look at number 17. Now, number 17 looks a little bit different because my A value here is not a 1. Well, we always look for GCF first when we are factoring. So, what's the greatest common factor that goes into all three of these numbers? It's a 3. Well, if I take a 3 out, remember you need that one big parenthesis to tell me what's left over. So 3 divided by 3 leaves me with 1x squared. Negative 21 divided by 3 leaves me with negative 7. X is in the middle. And 36 divided by 3 leaves me positive 12. So my GCF is 3. So now I have a trinomial in here that my A value is a 1, just like the previous problem. So now I'm looking for what multiplies to the number at the back, which is a 12, and it adds to the middle number of negative 7. So anytime you have a GCF, that guy gets a fast pass to the final answer. So now my 3 gets a fast pass to the final answer, and I just have to break this trinomial down again, just like we've done with all the rest. So again, in the front, what multiplies to give me x squared? X times x. Okay, so now I'm looking for numbers that multiply to 12 and add up to negative 7. And if you remember the hint I just told you, this tells me the signs have to be the same. Well, what are they? Are they both positives or both negatives? You look here and it tells me they both have to be negatives. So I'm looking for two negative numbers that multiply to 12 and add up to negative 7. Well, negative 1 and negative 12, negative 2 times negative 6, negative 3 times negative 4, negative 5, negative. So that's going to be it. Which ones add up to negative 7? That adds up to negative 13. Negative 2 minus 6 more, that's negative 8. There you go. Negative 3 minus 4 more, that adds up to negative 7. So I know my two numbers have to be negative 3 and negative 4. And again, it doesn't matter what order you put them in. But remember, anytime you have a GCF, you take a GCF out, greatest common factor. That dude right there out front gets a fast pass to the final answer. He better be in your final answer. All we're doing now is after we took the GCF out and you told me what's left over, now we take what's left over and we have to break it down and factor it a little bit further.